Welcome to Rates and Barrels. It is Wednesday, January 10th. Derek Van Riper here with Eno Saris. On this episode, we have some process-related things that we're going to talk about because we're back in it. We are drafting against each other. I didn't know it when I signed up for a draft 2 nights ago.
I saw you talking about drafting. I was like, oh, maybe I should draft.
And you clicked into the same one I was in, so we're in the same draft room, which is,
Well, actually, I bought a 3-pack, so I didn't even... The weird thing about 3-pack is like you just have to you just like kind of give them your preferences and then they just like fill it. So
there you go.
I didn't mean to, but then I was like, oh, our league just filled.
a lot of familiar names, industry folks. There are just very good NFBC players in this particular league. There's some listeners mixed in there too, so should be a fun room. We're about, I don't know, midway through the 6th round as we start recording here on this Wednesday. So I'm sure we'll talk about some things that have happened in the early rounds so far, talk about it in the next couple of episodes.
Maybe we'll talk about something as it happens. Since
yeah.
I'm about 2 away from picking.
Yeah, I probably get a pick during the show today too. Some news that broke.
Live thought process. Should I do it?
Well, I don't know. We could try it, and I don't know if it'll be repeated. So we could try it at least one time.
Give us feedback if I make my pick live on air. Tell me if that was interesting, or don't do that again.
We may be able to just get us there with one topic first, and that is Shōta Imanaga nearing a deal with the Cubs. It sounds like it's close to done or almost done at the time of this recording. A complicated deal is the term that I've seen thrown around. So I don't know if that means multiple opt-outs or deferred money or some combination of both or something else entirely. But this would be a pretty big get for a Cubs rotation that needs at least one more high quality starter. So we did this a little bit with Yoshinobu Yamamoto the week you were gone. We were talking about the impact he should bring and kind of reference the piece that you wrote, looking at his arsenal. What are we talking about with Imanaga? Like, what is the possible payoff for him as he makes the move to Major League Baseball?
Well, the positives are immediate with Imanaga. Is that he would have the fastball with the most ride in baseball the minute he lands. I mean, yes, they use a different ball in Japan, but I'm comparing to the WBC where they used a Rawlings ball. And yes, that was a tournament where he only threw like 45 fastballs, but stuff like shape and stuff plus in 45 fastballs is usually enough. So I would say he will at least immediately have top 10 ride in baseball. And so you're comparing him to guys like Felix Bautista, there's Alex Vesia, Nestor Cortez has a lot of vertical ride. So, that's a group that you're looking at. But if you look at the top 10 guys in ride, Imanaga's release point is 10 inches lower on average than that top 10 group. So it's a combination of a really low release point, 5.5 feet. Mostly people are at 6+, and 5.5 feet plus the most ride in baseball. I think the fastball is really going to play. And there's this aspect of, there's some heat maps in there from Lance Brazowski in the piece that maybe he hasn't been using the ideal strategy for that fastball. So just looking at heat maps, he does not throw it where the other guys with high ride throw their fastballs. So there's something of upside there. There's also upside in his flaws. Like I looked, fastball, slider, they look good. It's interesting. Yamamoto, his slider didn't look that good, but everything else looks so good that you're like, he's going to be good. With Imanaga, it's more like fastball, slider are good. His strikeout rate in Japan last year was better than Yamamoto's. His strikeout minus walk was better than Yamamoto's. So a lot of things there. The bad stuff, the curve and the cutter, not great. But, is that upside? I think that represents upside. Like, think about somebody like Jordan Montgomery. What are you going to tell Jordan Montgomery? Like, what? Like, do you have a plan for Jordan Montgomery? Like, ooh, come in here and we will do this. No. You're just like, that is Jordan Montgomery. He strikes out fewer people than average, but he's got a really good collection of pitches. He knows how to use them. Bam. That's Jordan Montgomery. I'm not going to tell him what to do, But with Imanaga, you have a little bit of like, hey, you're coming to America. Let's try this. Should we try a gyro slider instead of a curve? Should we try this? Should we try this? So a lot of different things that represent upside. And the deal to me, which is anywhere from 2 to 30 to like 5-80. Bowden has some reporting that sort of represents that as a possibility. I think more teams should have been on him. I think the Giants missed an opportunity here, especially given the biggest flaw for Imanaga has been home runs. And you would think that would be something that San Francisco would kind of pounce on. But, they, for whatever reason, didn't stay in. I hope I'm not giving away too much of the piece. There's a lot of interesting stuff in there, but I would say that the comps are in the eye of the beholder, I'll say. Nestor Cortez, Joe Ryan, Christian Javier. Those are the places that I found guys with a lot of ride, fastball slider types, home run issues, high fly ball guys. The interesting thing about that group, there's some really good seasons in that group. And there are some pretty bad seasons in it.
Well, and I think, every time we talk about Joe Ryan, I think about how effective he was initially upon getting to the big leagues and how it sort of tapered off over time. I know there's some deception in his delivery that helps make his fastball play up and everything. So it makes me wonder, and even Nestor Cortez, right? The success he had was 2 years ago now. I know he was hurt last year, and that may have been a big part of why he wasn't quite the same guy. It gives you this sense that, hey, maybe Imanaga comes over and is good right away, but then the league starts to figure it out if the other secondaries don't come around, right? The fastball
30,
slider combo,
he's like 30 also. So like
out of the box, he should be pretty good. And then it's just a question of how quickly the league can adjust and whether or not the rest of the arsenal comes together.
That's an interesting take. Also because the league as a whole is getting better at hitting pitches with ride. We've got the whole Marcus Semien, Matt Olson, Alex Bregman philosophy of aiming at the top half of the ball when the guy has ride, and so, maybe they're more prepared for it. I will have to say though, that, just thinking about the market, if you put those guys on the market, Javier, Ryan, and Cortez right now, I think they get more than what Imanaga got. I guess they're younger, but that's why I said the comps are in the eye of the beholder. Some people might hear that list and be like, "Ooh, that's stinky." I mean, especially since the years that all three of those guys just came off of bad years.
Well, now that we know where Imanaga's headed, I'm assuming we'll get some stability in where he's being drafted. The range of where he's been picked just in the January drafts is huge. Early pick of 109, late pick of 278. Average is 87th overall among pitchers, 220 ADP. He's probably going to push his way up 40 or 50 spots. Now that
I guess
in Chicago.
It's interesting. I mean, I would have loved for him to, like, the best case scenario would have been San Francisco for me. A guy with a home run problem, want to put him there. And or maybe St. Louis. Both of those places would have been best case scenarios for me. Wrigley is interesting because the wind blows in sometimes. And then it blows out sometimes.
Sometimes it blows out. Yes.
So like day games, are we really worried? I think this is a middling situation for him, but I think I still like him better than consensus, I would say. And so I'm in on those prices. I think that, it's your taste for risk, but at those prices right now, the risk is priced in. If he starts going regularly at 100, as excited as I am about him, like, what's the would you rather at 100?
I mean, one of his teammates, Justin Steele, goes around pick 100. So you'd have.
I mean, even if you like distrust Justin Steele, like, he's shown it in the big leagues at least.
Right. I would take Justin Steele over Imanaga. Like, that's not really a tough one for me. Dylan Cease goes up in that range.
I just made my case for Dylan Cease on the last pod, so I don't need to make it again. But yeah, I'd take Dylan Cease.
Walker Buehler.
We don't know how many innings they'll let him pitch, but yeah, I'm taking Walker Buehler.
Cole Reagans goes in that range.
Yeah, I'm taking Cole Reagans.
Right. So I think that'd be hyper aggressive. I think the range where you start to think about it, Chris Bassett goes around 140.
There you go. Now you got me listening.
Jordan Montgomery, Merrill Kelly. We've talked about that cluster before. I think when we talked about Chris Sale moving to Atlanta, he's in that cluster as well. That's probably where Imanaga reasonably belongs with the Cubs. Probably a guy you're going to use for most of his matchups. Maybe you err on the side of caution initially in some of the more difficult spots, but even in division, I mean, I'm not out of the first month of the season. If they're playing in St. Louis, I'm not sitting him for that in a deep league. That's not
in Milwaukee
happen.
is a little scary, but it's the Milwaukee offense. So no offense.
No, hey, I didn't build it, man. Like it's
I didn't build it.
It's not my. I didn't. My fingerprints aren't on that roster. It still boosts homers, the park, American Family Field, but everything else about the park has actually started to play a little more pitcher friendly. So that's kind of a strange quirk of the last couple of seasons as well. But yeah, I think I'm in kind of in that 150, 160 range potentially. And that's probably about where he's going to settle now that we know where he's likely to go. As I mentioned, we are back in the draft room. You're not on the clock yet. I think it's going to happen while we're recording, though. But I had to say, it's a 2-hour pick clock. The person on the clock 2 seats away from you has just over an hour to go. So most likely you will get to pick during this show. I was thinking about this from the perspective of like where you want to be in the draft order. We think about that a lot more closer to March, like the main events, the higher stakes leagues we play in. And it matters regardless of the league you play in. And I think the way you have to think about it is mapping out what happens with different foundations, right? Like when you're trying to build a good team, you have to think about where you are in the draft order, what is likely to be available at each of the first few turns. So I'm curious, how far out do you try and script something when it comes to your draft strategy in a snake draft? Is it 4 rounds, 6 rounds, 10 rounds? Like, where do you sort of say, this is far enough for me to know like what my foundation looks like and what I have to do the rest of the way to put it all together?
I may do less of that this year than I have in the past. And here's my reasoning. If you look at the auction values overall for the top batters, Ronald Acuna Jr. right now, with the settings for NFBC, which is 15 teams, 2 catchers, all that stuff, is pricing out at $55. And second place in the auction calculator, which is Aaron Judge. I don't necessarily agree with that because they're giving him 679 plate appearances. And I don't know if I'm giving him 679 plate appearances. But second place is Aaron Judge at $34. That's a $20 difference. And even if you go beyond that. So first of all, like if I get to decide where I'm drafting first. I'll take Acuna. Thank you very much. So, okay. So we're setting up our, what do we want to do? What do we want to do first? Okay. First, I want to take first. So then you're like, ooh, would I like to take the turn or whatever? Well, the 15th best hitter is not a $30 player. Whereas the sort of top 5 to 8 players are $30 players, maybe even the top 10. Corbin Carroll, by the auction calculator, is the 10th best bat. He has a $30 value. If you go over to pitchers, because of the offensive explosion, there's one $30 pitcher, Spencer Strider. So I basically just want to draft in the order of the draft. I think the one aspect that I don't like, I just pointed out that there's 10 $30 hitters and there's one $30 pitcher. I really don't like 9 through 12 or 13. I don't like that because you're just not getting to choose the best players and you end up with choices that are so hard. Like 12 and 13 are Trey Turner and Bryce Harper. It's a pretty old group now. The projections say those aren't at all first rounders. So that just could be a quirk of our draft. But you also earlier around there have a choice of Freddie Freeman. I ended up 9, which I didn't think was a big deal, but I really wanted Tatis, Strider, or Tucker.
They went in the 3 picks right before you.
6 is Tucker, 7 is Strider, 8 is Tatis. So I ended up with Juan Soto. So like the back end of that deal, and you were 14, and you end up with Ohtani, and 15 is Jose Ramirez. Like the back end of the first round is old people. Now, Soto is 26, so and an impending free agent. So that's why I took him I took him above Aaron Judge because I just believe that Juan Soto is going to get out in the field every day because he's trying to get $450 million. So, he's going to be out in the field every day. I don't necessarily think Judge is going to be out in the field every day. So I wanted to max out my plate appearances. And yeah, if Judge gets 670 plate appearances, he will be worth more than Soto. I understand that. It was a bet against that. But I'm just saying, I don't love those decisions between 9 and 13. You can get me back in at 14 and 15 because I can be like, pop, pop. I get two guys.
I've made this case before. I like picking at an end where you get the two picks together.
Yeah.
I think
you don't love 14 so much. You gave me some cuss words when you saw you had 14.
Yeah, I've been
still have to wonder
lot.
What the other guy will do.
It's the weather. It's you know what it really is. It's like you almost get two together, but you really have to pay a guy who can
screw it up.
Well, you have to look every single round. You got to say, okay, what does the person next to me have? And I've got to decide like which of the things I want is more likely to be taken with those two picks, and then sort of guess right on that. So that's a game in and of itself.
And so much. And early on, you can just totally get it wrong where you're like, he already has a shortstop. He's not going to take in the shortstop. I want a shortstop. I'm going to leave that shortstop out there. And then he's going to be like, two shortstops, got one for my MI. And you're like,
Yeah. So there's that aspect of it where like, that's what I was more mad about than the players that I was going to get, because my team started Ohtani, Yordan Alvarez. Like, that's fine. There's sluggers. Those guys can hit. That's wonderful. The thing that I think about a lot is trying to decide like what my early round flaw is going to be, because you generally in Roto 5x5 you
choose one.
You're chasing 10 categories, and if you're thinking about the first 6 rounds, you probably didn't cover all 6 categories, all 10 categories in the first 6 rounds. It's possible, but it's unlikely, just because things have to break absolutely perfectly for you to have an ace, an elite closer, plenty of speed, all the power that you'd want in the foundation, and guys that all
sounds like a 10-teamer.
Yeah, usually it's more of a 10-teamer. Can it happen? Sure. But more likely than not, in a competitive room, you have to give something up. And in this environment, the thing that I'm most comfortable giving up is speed, right? Steals are easier to find. And I think they're going to enter the league at a high rate too. I think you're going to find that when players come up and take over spots, when fourth outfielders get to play as a starter,
give them the green light.
Yeah, they're going to offer up that as some categorical juice in
just
season.
Look at Nolan Jones. We're going to talk about a little bit more later, but Nolan Jones didn't have that much speed, and they were just like, "Hey, we're the Rockies. You're young. The rules are good. Like, fine, go for it." 20 stolen bases.
Yeah, so it's like Ohtani runs, of course, because he does everything. Alvarez does it.
I did the same thing as you, by the way. So we're gonna be
we're looking for the same players
later.
Fantastic. So excited for that. And it came down to, I mean, the choice ended up being saves or steals. What am I more comfortable finding more of later? In this particular format, a draft and hold league, this is a draft champions league at the NFBC. It's 50 rounds. There are no in-season moves. And the longer I've played these, the more I've been adamant that I want one of my closers in the circle of trust, which any given year is like 6 to 10 different closers. This year, there's probably 7 or 8. Being on an end, especially, after about round 3, round 4, there's going to be a nice run of that group. And it comes back to you in round 5 or 6, and it's sort of, you get what's left, or you can be a little bit more of an aggressor and take someone at the beginning of the group. I decided to be more of an aggressor and take Edwin Diaz, because I think he's just
and I hate taking closers early, but I'm with you on that, because in this format in particular, because of the things you said, but also like the thing that's most precious in draft and hold, because you don't have any ability to go to free agency. The thing that's most precious is roster slots.
Yep.
And so if you don't take an early closer, then you're going to have to dedicate more roster slots to relievers, because you're going to have to take more chances later. So you might have to take 6 or 7 relievers. Now you have 40. What is it, 40 or 50? 50?
50.
You have 50 roster slots. 6 or 7 doesn't sound that bad, but you have to have all your third basemen for the year. Yep. And I'm always like, get 3 third basemen, get three. I want three of every infield. Yeah, you can count one guy twice if he's got eligibilities. That's why multi-eligibilities are good. But I want to have three of every position. So if you want to have three of every position and like 7 or 8 outfielders and like 14 starting pitchers, you run and like 3 or 4 catchers, you run out of relievers. So then you start making decisions like, am I going to have an 8th outfielder or am I going to have another reliever? And taking a shot at a late reliever is just so painful because you're like, even when you're like, oh, I like this guy. He could close. Like his stuff plus is good. Like he's on a team with a bad closer. Like what's a percentage likelihood that guy closes? And like, and how much value does that player have if he doesn't close? Like 0.
It's like Julian Merriweather. Oh, good. There's a format. We can draft Julian Merriweather. And like you were right. He almost had 100 Ks last year. He got the ERA into the mid-3s. Whip wasn't great, but
he had like 5 saves.
Yeah, 2.
2.
It's like the hit rate on those late relievers. I think it's low when you consider that the saves are so important. If it was saves plus holds, then of course you could weight more on relievers, but you can't because of the way these are built.
And leagues, you can weight more on closers.
And I think I have more. I also have a lot of confidence in my ability to find position players in those late double-digit rounds that are going to end up being useful. I don't want to throw away those roster spots on relievers. I'd rather have as few relievers as possible to then have a bunch of guys that I think can come up, play, or multi-position guys, bounce back guys. Every combination of hitters available late as far as
the biggest decision ends up being, I think, usually a prospect or a reliever. And you can make the argument that those prospects don't hit either. But when those prospects do hit, and if you're picking among the top 5 prospects or top 10 or even the top 15, or if you're picking a prospect that's in a team where you're pretty sure he's going to play, like Nolan Jones last year, he was on my deep league, lists, and that's a great outcome. Did he go like 2020?
Yeah,
and he didn't cost you anything. He cost you the same as a reliever in a draft and hold in like the 35th round. So I would rather be shopping in the Nolan Jones bucket than the Julian Merriweather bucket because both of those worked out, quote unquote. The Merriweather got you 2 saves.
So Nolan Jones was fantastic, and it was a smart trade for the Rockies. Like you have to give them some credit for this. They don't get credit very often, but this is a 30-30 pace from Jones because he only played 106 games. So he went 2020 in 424 plate appearances. It's a 15.7% barrel rate underneath, an improvement in the K rate that we saw during his brief time in Cleveland. He was at 33% when he debuted, get that down to 29.7%. He walks. And he is tooled up. I think when you look at the StatCast numbers, I remember looking and seeing he had like maximum arm strength and better speed than I thought. Like there's a ton of raw potential in Nolan Jones that made him intriguing a year ago. I think the hardest thing for me is knowing how inexpensive Nolan Jones was in drafts last year, knowing some of his limitations with the strikeout rate, and then seeing the market just go kind of all in on him this year, where he is consistently a top 75 pick. That's the latest he's gone in January, but more likely he's a fringe top 50 guy. And I just think I'm a little unsure because even with all those things that I like, I wonder, okay, he's a left-handed hitter who strikes out a lot. Is he a platoon risk? And then even though he hits the ball hard and runs well, is he going to have a 401 BABIP again? I mean, Coors helps for sure, but how much batting average is he giving back? Projections, Steamers got him at 265. That feels about right. If he's 265 with 25 homers and something close to 20 steals again, I'm probably wrong. So am I being too stubborn about the price increase on Nolan Jones, given the tools, the underlying skills, and the setup for him in Colorado?
I think so. I'm going to take the pro Jones side of this because, and this has something to do with Lars Nootbaar for me. So Lars Nootbaar, I took my shirt off with him. I trained with him. I thought he was going to be a sleeper. I saw his bat speed going up. I picked him up in one of my deepest prospect fantasy leagues, Devil's Rejects, and then there was like a roster crunch early in the season. He hadn't quite taken off, and I dropped him, and someone else picked him up. and they got the benefit of what Nootbaar has done since. And recently I tried to open up talks to trade for Nootbaar. And do you know how painful that was?
Everyone knows how much you like him, so that probably didn't go well.
But also, I have to now pay full price, right? For somebody that I had picked up for free. And that's what I think that's the similar emotion that I think you're dealing with.
It's like it's sticker shock. It's just knowing like, hey, like I thought I could.
He was like free last year.
Yeah, more or less. The interesting thing too, and I suggested the possibility of him being platooned based on what he did against lefties. They shouldn't platoon him. They should keep first off, they're the Rockies.
Right, exactly. Like is he like your best young player? I'd like him better than Tovar.
There's a really good chance that he's your best young player on the big league roster right now. Why on earth would you platoon him? The only thing I could think of is, well, they're the Rockies. 130 plate appearances last season against lefties. Nolan Jones only had a 26% K rate. He struck out less against lefties than he did overall. He had a 314, 377, 522 line. It's a 130 WRC plus. Yes, it was a tiny sample. But based on that, you keep playing him.
Like generally he hits the ball hard. Like you were talking about his BABIP, and like he was in the Cleveland organization and he ran BABIPs over 400 at 3 levels. I mean, that's pretty good. His lifetime minor league batting average on balls in play, and I'm just eyeballing this, I think it's like 370. I mean, that's how intense his BABIPs were in the minors. And I know bad defense, minor league BABIP. I'm not saying that port's over. I'm just saying, like, when you see a projection for a 348 BABIP this next year, that's not only Coors, it's because he hits the ball friggin' hard. So I think, yes, he's going to strike out, and there is some risk in the batting average. But I also think that, you know, the projection says 16 stolen bases. He stole 20 bases last year in 400 plate appearances. Why are we saying that Nolan Jones is going to steal fewer bases next year? Because of regression, because he didn't steal as much of the minors, blah, 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 blah. I think that the rule change is messing with projections. There was a couple other ones we saw. We saw Trey Turner's stolen base projection is pretty low.
It was down. I mean, some of this might just be age getting baked in. Some of it might be Steamer not fully projecting the stolen base environment to be the same in 24 as it was.
Maybe he's just doing traditional projection strategies where it's like, well, one of these years is not like the other. One of these years should get like double or triple weight, you know, because that's the year with the new rules. Another one was CJ Abrams, stole 47 bases. He's 23 years old, and they say he's going to steal 30 next year. It's like, why?
Yeah, of all the things, so we could sit here and talk about CJ Abrams for 25 minutes. We have been.
The group chat has been talking about CJ Abrams for a while.
I've already flipped twice, I think, on CJ Abrams. And like, if you go back a year, I loved him last year. I thought the best case for CJ Abrams going into last season was
what he did, probably.
Well, it was injuries. Like injuries plus the lost pandemic season meant he got to the big leagues with about as few plate appearances as any non-Angels prospect in the last 5 years. So there's tons of lost development time as a result of that. So I thought, okay, CJ Abrams could still get a lot better given his age and all that missed time. And he played a ton, and he did get better because the barrel rate jumped from 2.1% in his rookie season up to 6.9%, which for him, like, that's a huge improvement. I wonder how sticky it is. There's a couple things that you look at, you say, okay, chases a lot outside the zone. 38.6% O swing, still an improvement from when he debuted. Step in the right direction. Only a 279 BABIP. That's kind of interesting. It's like okay, that seems low for a guy that runs well.
Yeah, he doesn't really hit the ball that hard.
Right. So maybe it's only a slight bump there, but even if he gets up to 9,300, that's a little increase to the batting average. That's probably where you find 15 points of average. Steamer has him at 261. He hit 245 last year. I think here's the problem that I have with CJ Abrams, and it's probably a me problem. When I look at a player and I see a below average real life offensive value next to his name, and CJ Abrams has that.
This is the Bobby Witt scenario.
Yes, I have a very hard time in the first 3, 4, 5 rounds of a draft saying, give me that guy. And I think more often than not, when you find a player with that profile, it's going to be someone who plays a lot like Abrams value-wise, where speed is the number one thing you're going to get, and the rest of the profile is a little bit more concerning. I know there was some
But you're
chatter,
worried about less playing time or going down in the order. If they're a below average hitter, why would they hit 1, 2, 3? Except it's the Nationals. It was the Royals.
Right. It's the same kind of argument that I was putting out there with Nolan Jones. It's like, well, as long as we trust the organization to do the right thing. Colorado, it's hard to do. Washington, I have a little more faith that they'd say, let him play. Let him figure it out. Let him figure out lefties. Even if that means he drops to 7th or 8th in the order against lefties, if they're winning more games than expected and they have to manage the lineup in a way that makes them as competitive as possible, is he going to lose playing time or is he just going to lose batting?
People don't muck around with shortstop. It's like people don't want to do platoons at shortstop.
No.
So
that's why I think it'd be bottom
for
third.
600 plus, and if he's going to get 600 plus, I think he's going to get 40 stolen bases at least because he got 47 last year. I think 260, 15 homers, 40 stolen bases. Like I think he's actually going sort of near where he needs to go. So in our draft, he went in the 4th round with the 8th pick. So that's around 50. 53.
Yeah. Slight discount, I think, relative to where he usually goes.
For my game, at that point, I had Juan Soto, Vlad Guerrero, and Corbin Burns.
Yeah, we both passed on him in the 4th round. We both had need for some speed.
I had him right there. I was staring a hole into him because with Soto and Vlad Guerrero, I was like, well, I could use some speed. But that conversation you talked about earlier, speed saves. I really had that decision, and knowing where I was and looking at the draft pool, I took Emmanuel Clase. Now, first of all, the stuff plus base projections have Emmanuel Clase with the lowest projected ERA in all of baseball. So that's kind of cool. And that's kind of maybe an argument that he's number 1 among closers, So, I'll take a 2.01 projected ERA. Plus, when I looked at Clase, who was left? Iglesias, Doval, Romano, and Bednar. Those are all guys that I was okay with, but there were like 18 picks or whatever. I'm sure that math is wrong. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. No, there were 16 picks before I go again.
Mm-hmm.
Guess what happened? They all went.
They all went before the end of the 4th round.
They didn't even make it to the next round. So
after you took Class A, there were 3. It was Abrams, Skubal, Nola, and then Iglesias, Doval, Matt McClain, Romano, and Bednar. That ended the 4th round.
So I feel like I made the right decision because then otherwise, if I had taken Abrams there, I'd have to. Alexis Diaz is the only guy that would have been there for my next pick.
Yeah, and the consideration I had was the Diaz pick in round 3, and also wanting to get at least one starting pitcher in my first 4 picks because I was looking at Yamamoto, and I think in my first draft rankings, they're not published yet, I've got him inside my top 10. I think the main reason I have him in my top 10, the piece you wrote was very convincing. You can't have an arsenal that good and be less than a top 15 or top 20 starting pitcher. But the more I looked at all the risk, all the profiles,
the comp there was Gossman with an elite breaking ball. Gossman's never had an elite breaking ball, and Gossman himself is a top 5 pitcher.
Right. And we talked about the workload last week a little bit. It's like, well, the Dodgers already do this with their pitchers.
Yeah,
they're already backing off guys a little bit.
There's an interesting tidbit in Andy McCullough's mailbag this week about it. I didn't realize how pervasive it was. I mean, basically, their starting pitchers make half of their starts on extra rest.
Yeah, and it's probably a well-conceived idea to keep them fresh for October.
Yeah,
which is fine. I just think that as the ceiling of other starting pitcher workloads has fallen, teams being more careful and managing their rotation the way the Dodgers do, and other teams do it, a few other teams do it too, it's less of a detriment to their individual value, right? Because that workload gap gets smaller. So I saw the same kind of thing you did, where I was starting to think about Abrams, like, hey, with Yordan Alvarez as my second hitter, I'm already light on speed. So I have to make sure that if I see someone I really like from a speed perspective, I have to jump in. I like CJ Abrams more than Nico Horner. The more I look at those two players, I have a little more faith in Abrams.
Those are the two I was playing with. I was hoping that, like, maybe by not taking Abrams, there's more available to me, later in terms of speed at shortstop. But I didn't. My next pick, I can go through the reasoning there in a second. But
yeah, so for me, it was Yamamoto, expecting a run similar to what happened from my pick.
And you took two hitters,
4.
where I took Corbin Burns second. So that's right. A little bit of difference. You had a sort of a pressing need where you're like, starting pitching, still don't have one.
And what's interesting is that I thought about Burns and Gerrit Cole. And I had Cole in the queue, of course, because I was picking 14th overall. And I didn't feel great about it. I kept looking at it and I'm like, this is weird. Like, I usually love getting Gerrit Cole late in the first round. What's going on? Like, what am I afraid of?
Well,
we got an email about this.
Yeah, we got an email, yeah.
So let's get to Gerrit Cole for a second, because I think there's some things that are happening when we evaluate pitchers right now, and it seems like no one's really immune to it. And Gerrit Cole is coming off of an excellent 2023 season, right? 2.63 ERA, 0.98 WHIP. How about 209 innings of those ratios too? That's so valuable. Well over a strikeout per inning still.
It was the number one.
Wins.
He was the number one.
He was the guy. The issue is the strikeout rate dropped, right? That's the concern.
A little bit of the velo drop.
Velo drop, strikeout rate came down with it. Swinging strike rate underneath that K rate also down. Not a surprise. He's 33 now. The stuff came down just a little bit, even though the stuff's still very good. And the email we got was wondering, in part, too, if he got lucky on homers, if that was just a big part of why everything popped for him ratios-wise, and if that might be covering up some of the skills flaws, because Sierra, one of the ERA indicators, popped up to 3.63 for Cole last year, so a full run above his actual ERA.
Since he's became who he is in Houston.
Right, his last season in Pittsburgh.
Yeah,
that was his last season in Pittsburgh was the last time he was that bad in Sierra. So considering this, and the email also was asking about just power pitchers and long-term workloads. This is a guy that's got over 1,800 regular season innings on his arm.
Like pristine, dude.
Like, is it time to actually worry about Gerrit Cole, or is that just making a problem that doesn't really exist?
Well, one thing that I saw that looks intentional is that Gerrit Cole increased the usage of his cutter and his curve and decreased the usage of his slider last season. And we even had a conversation about this in spring training where, he didn't want to use the cutter too much because he didn't want it to affect the shape of his four seam. But he was interested in replacing some sliders with cutters to left-handers. And that's in effect what he did. Now, it's only 1 percentage point when you look at it overall, but it's more exaggerated when you look against lefties. And what would happen if you reduce slider usage against lefties and increase cutter and curveball usage against lefties? You might give up fewer homers. So I think there's some explanation for the lower home run rate. However, you're right. In terms of statistics, that's the noisiest statistic. And we have a demonstrated 4-year run, even when Cole was a beast, of a home run rate more like a $1.25, 1.25 per 9. And last year was 0.9. So that's why the projections have the home run rate coming up. They have some positive regression in the strikeout rate, but not much. And the projections, 3.73 ERA from Steamer.
That still feels a little high.
Yeah, I think so too. I mean, he hasn't had a 3.73 since that last year in Pittsburgh, even with those home run rates, even in New York. And, maybe this is the beginning of him throwing the cutter. What if he throws a cutter 15% of the time next year and staves off home runs that way? I have so much respect for him in terms of just how good he's been. Like, he has 1,900 innings basically of a 3.17 ERA and a 29% strikeout rate. Like, he's a Hall of Famer.
Yep.
So I know he's 33, and at some point you start worrying about this, but think about the other Hall of Famers that we've seen pitch recently. Max Scherzer and Justin Verlander. When did you really start to see some cracks in the foundation? At 40.
Hold on a minute. With Scherzer, I think I'm with you.
Earlier than that?
With Verlander, and some of this coincided with the core muscle issue that he had back.
Right, he did have that surgery, and then Tommy John.
About 10 years ago, he had that. So what happened was that during his time in Detroit, after he turned 30, Verlander had that season. He threw 206 innings with a 4.54 ERA and a 1.40 WHIP with 159 Ks. And I remember talking to, I think at the time I was hosting Short Hops with Bernie Pleskoff, and we both made like a top 25 starters. We're like, he's done. Verlander's done. He's not Verlander
That's
anymore.
A much worse season than the Cole one. Cole just had. Cole just won the Cy Young, and we're talking about other problems. I think Cole is more closer to Verlander. So like you're gonna see him rattle off another 5 years of a 3-something ERA, 3.2.
Yeah, and Verlander bounced back to a 3.38 and 109 for the ratios in 2015, a 304 with an even one whip, 254 Ks in 2016. And then 2017 was the year that he got traded to Houston. And then everything kind of like ticked up again once he got to the Astros. Like that's when he kind of hit this late career stretch where he was just unbelievable. I wonder if someone like Gerrit Cole and the concern about how he ages being a power pitcher points to how close does he sit to his max, how much of that wear and tear, that cumulative wear and tear builds up on him. It's a bit of an unknown. Everybody's different. But Gerrit Cole does seem more like a Verlander or a Scherzer in terms of arm care, how he approaches hitters, the depth of his arsenal, knowing that as he loses something, he has to add something to counteract it, right? Like this seems like a profile that's still going to be very good for a long time, even if it's not 30+% K rates anymore. If it's 27, 28% for the next couple of seasons, it's not going to be the end of the world.
Yeah, and in terms of like his average and max, like, he's still maintaining like a 2-mile-an-hour difference. In fact, last year he was a little bit further from his max than usual. So in some ways, last year was a conserved momentum year, and he won the Cy Young. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Like he was like, I'm going to step off of my four seam a little bit. He still hit 99, 100 as his max, but he sat more 96, 97. And he's like, and instead of using the slider all the time, I'm going to mix in some cutters and curves and try to reduce the home run rate. So it almost seemed like Cole was like sort of entering a different phase, but it's not one that I think is going to be much worse. So I'm still on the Cole train. Ooh, John Coltrane.
I think we could look back at the 2024 draft season, and a bunch of us that took those hitters that we like for 5-category production, and we did it at the expense of Gerrit Cole. We might say, ooh, maybe we chased pitching unnecessarily. We had a shot at a guy that was going to be top 3 again among starters, and we decided to take a bat. I don't know.
Another thing that I'm doing this year that's a little different. So I'm doing some blurbs with my rankings. And that's making me kind of go under the hood a little bit. But also one thing that I'm doing while I'm writing these blurbs is looking at past end of year auction value results, and that's a little different. It's a little bit weird to do that because we look at projections and we put the projections in the auction calculator, we get a number and we're like, okay, Aaron Nola is a top 10 pitcher by projections in the auction calculator. I'm totally fine with that. I see why these things were regressing this way, and his stuff, and that's how I've tended to look. Is sort of like I'm looking at the stats. I'm not going to look at what he was worth in fantasy last year. I'm going to look at the stats and try to build a picture, and then look what that would be worth, right? But this year, I've been looking at what they actually finished in, just so I can get a sense, like how good have they actually been. And so with Gerrit Cole. You got last year, you got the number 1 starting pitcher. And then over the last 6 years, he's averaged the 9th best starting pitcher. Right. So you're buying a tremendous amount of floor. Like you can buy Gerrit Cole and you could get the average finish from the last 6 years and he'd still be a top 10 pitcher for the year, and probably with a lot of innings. So you'd probably be like, I'm happy with that. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. So that was illuminating for me. The other one was Aaron Nola. So Aaron Nola, the projection for him on Steamer is $22. That's I think it's back end top 10. It's more than Logan Webb. It's more than Luis Castillo. It's more than Corbin Burns. Like Aaron Nola is projected to be worth more than Corbin Burns in the coming season. And that just didn't sit right with me for a lot of different reasons. And so I thought, let me look back and look at because I feel like Aaron Nola every year, the projections is like, he's going to be good. And then I'm like, well, what was he actually worth? So these are the last 3 finishes for Aaron Nola in the auction calculator: 58th, 18th, and 51st. So I'm not going to take somebody who's done that and who is not leaving his park, is going to play in front of the same defense, and just project him into the top 10. I'm just not going to do that. He hasn't done that. So as much as I like Aaron Nola, he's dropping for me in my means tested rankings, in my blurb tested rankings, and in this look. And then, that's part of why we're doing this draft, right? Is to like, let's start actually putting these rankings that we're doing into play and see what we're actually going to do. So, what did he go? Nola went, let's see. Let me see if I can find him.
4th round to team 6. So that's about pick 55.
And among starting pitchers, that's 1, 2. So the starting pitchers that went were Strider first, which is, I think most people are agreeing on that. Cole second, Burns to me third, Wheeler fourth, Castillo fifth, Gausman sixth, Glasnow 7th, Gallen 8th, Kirby 9th, Pablo Lopez 10th, Yamamoto 11th to you, and Skubal and Nola 12th and 13th. That's a little bit closer to where I have my rankings, but right now in my working rankings, I have Nola 16th. And there's a bit of a down arrow there because I have Gallen behind him, and I think I like Gallen better. So I think Nola might end up like 18th in my rankings. And that's the best finish he's had the last 3 years. So I don't feel that bad,
It's just it's partially the home run rates. They tend to run a little higher for Aaron Nola overall. Last season, or 2 years ago, 2022, the ratios came way down. The home run rate was way down. And I just wonder, was he just lucky on homers? Was that most of how he did it that year when he popped?
Yeah. I mean, that's another thing about Cole is like, yes, okay, let's say he was lucky on homers last year. He got a long string of demonstrated good results with the home run rate, right? Whereas with Nola, if you say, okay, he got lucky on home runs that 1 year, well, in the years where he had normal home run rates, quote unquote, he wasn't that super useful.
Yeah. I do think the thing that gives Nola a decent floor, though, even if you got a down arrow next to his name, it's like the walk rate continues to be great, right? So usually even if the ERA bounces up, the whip stays really good. He doesn't walk a lot of guys because of the volume, high win probability, pretty good strikeout
volume
totals.
Is good. The volume has been very good.
It's just, for me, it's lowering my expectations of what his true ceiling is. It's just dropped a bit compared to where it was 2 or 3 years ago, and I would have been more aggressive with Nola and played up his volume a little bit more. I see a few cracks in that foundation now. I've got him 11th right now, so I'm a little higher on him than you are, but it's a really tight group right there. I've got him behind Kirby and Gallen.
Hey, your means testing is a little bit off here. Oh, I guess you had Yamamoto 10th and Nola.
I have Yamamoto 7th.
Oh, wow. All right.
I have Yamamoto ahead of Luis Castillo, Kirby, and Gallen. One spot behind Gausman.
I do have a funny little other anecdote about the queue and my thinking. So my draft went Soto in the first round of the 9th pick, Burns, Vladimir Guerrero. Just the auction calculator was just spitting out an insane number for him, where I was like, he's a $26 player, and everyone else I'm looking at right now is $20. Like, I can't just ignore $7. And it is a little weird because it's like, yeah, Vlad Guerrero projected for 36 homers, hit 26 last year. Like, are we sure about this? But I took the shot. So then my next pick, and then Emmanuel Clase. So my next pick was right before bedtime. So I had to set a cue. And I set a cue. And I feel good and bad about this, but it's just funny because I go to bed and I set a cue, and my cue is Nolan Jones, who we just talked about. I liked the idea of getting some speed and power and getting a Coors guy. I didn't mind getting another outfielder. I put Paul Goldschmidt in. Paul Goldschmidt is by the auction calculator really likes him. And then also he's bat speed training at Driveline. And I just like that. And like, he's going to be a non-zero in steals too. So it's not adding steals, but it's not putting a 0 in steals. So like all my guys are going to get 5 to 10 to 15 steals. So I'm going to be adding some steals here and there. So I wanted to put Paul Goldschmidt on. And then Grayson Rodriguez projects really well, and I like him. And so I put him third in my queue. Nolan Jones went right before me. I got Paul Goldschmidt, and Grayson Rodriguez went right after me. So I felt good about my cue making abilities and reading the room. But, I think my team has the same flaw as yours. I've got Goldschmidt, Soto, Burns, Clase, and Vlad Guerrero. And what do I have? I have 30 steals, maybe.
Yeah, you've got the thing you have. I think you have plus run production though with that group.
Should be a lot of RBI, a lot of runs. Should be a good batting average. Should be a lot of homers.
It's 3 hitters that should never ever get days off. Most hitters in this range, the first few rounds don't get days off. It's just a matter of staying healthy. But I also like that, 2 of these guys are first basemen. So durability, usually a little less of a concern at that position. Goldschmidt going to Driveline, even at this stage of his career, I think he's a little underappreciated because his career has been kind of happening in the shadows of Mike Trout and even Manny Machado to some degree, like that cluster of former first rounders who continue to age really well. I kind of like Goldschmidt the most of the bunch right now, with Manny coming off surgery and with Trout's volume projection being necessarily lower.
They went right there. So yeah, Manny went right between Jones and Goldschmidt. Manny went in there. Manny had surgery, like you mentioned, and Trout went at the beginning of the 6th. So they're the old guys are that's like we're a little bit of an old guy cluster. I love that Goldschmidt has shown more durability than Trout, and also the same, maybe a similar amount of like dedication to the game. Is that the right word? Like Trout had a whole high in a swing early in his career, and then he just spent the whole off season and closed it. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. That's the kind of player that I see Goldschmidt as being. It's like consistently, like Goldschmidt used to be an oppo guy, and then later in his career, he learned how to pull fly balls. And then maybe in this last stage of his career, he has one more, great season in him because he went and just did bat speed training for the first time in his life, So I'm just really interested to see how that plays out for him. And I think the floor for him is still pretty high. Worst case scenario, I get something like last year, I think.
Yeah, that looks like a floor. He still had a 12% barrel rate last year. Run production, excellent. And yeah, even the bags, 11 bags again last year. So you're not taking a 0 in a position where a lot of people do take 0 or something closer to 0. So I think that kind of falls into that. Every little bit helps with steals, especially if you wait. That's part of how you make up some of that ground from those first couple of picks, is finding a few guys that like a catcher that runs a little bit can be a little bit helpful in a situation like this too. But Trout, it does mess with your head. You're sitting there late round 5, early round 6, and you see Trout sitting there and you're like, well, I don't know. He's had 861 plate appearances the last 2 seasons combined. Is it fewer than Stanton? I thought I saw something. It is over some time frame. It's fewer than Stanton. It's only 45 more than Eloy Jimenez. Wow. It is compared to Stanton. Let's see. God, I think that is less than Stanton because Stanton had a 600 plate appearance season. I'm pretty sure 867 for Stanton the last 2 years.
And
it's a lot of missed time. Trout was 861.
Whew, that is spicy. And Trout in the auction calculator looks like a good pick with 658 plate appearances, man. I'm sorry.
I don't know how you project his plate appearances because the back wasn't the problem last year, right? We were worried about the back. We thought the back initially
was it the calf last year?
We're forgetting all the injuries because there's so many.
Which one is it? Yeah.
It's horrible. It's like it's not the way it was supposed to be. It's a hamate bone, fractured hamate.
Oh, it's a hamate, yeah.
So that's kind of fluky, right? So if you're projecting based on the context,
you can't break that hamate bone again because they just take it out.
Right, gone. No more hamate. If you're basing it on like the fact that the back actually held up, and that they have no reason to back off of him other than like once every 3 weeks, every month, there's a chance he's a max volume player again. Like they won't prevent him from being close to that. It just comes down to him and the stuff that's happened and whether or not you believe in that. It doesn't really steal bases anymore. So you're not getting that. The thing that led me to pass on Trout, seeing him there in round 6, it was tempting for sure, was that having Yordan Alvarez as my second hitter, I did not want another hitter, especially in the outfield where I think I have to get a lot of my bags to make up that ground. I didn't want another outfielder who wasn't going to steal bases. So maybe it's overthinking it a little bit by process, but that was part of what made it easier for me to pass. I actually thought Jazz Chisholm might have been a better fit for my team in that spot. The problem with Jazz is just tons of strikeouts and tons of injuries.
It's not positionally interesting anymore.
No, I mean, the projections love him. 28 homers, 28 steals, comes with a 246 average. But if you feel good about what you've got for average foundation and you want a player that's projected to do everything, Jazz does make some sense.
He's on my queue. And I feel like comfortable talking about this because the next person is in the now picking green light.
Oh, the light is green.
And you're gonna have to actually publish this. So number 1 on my queue is Kyle Bradish to get a second starting pitcher that I have in my top 15 to pair with Corbin Burns. I think that's going to be what I take. But other than him, I have Josh Lowe for the stolen bases, Christian Yelich, well projected but older, and Jazz Chisholm as my next the next group because I do need to start thinking about stolen bases. And so that's where I'm looking is. In the outfield and the middle infield are going to be filled with stolen base guys pretty much.
I do wonder with Jazz, it was turf toe. He had surgery for that. Like,
how much is he going to steal?
He was still running around that injury though last year. 22 for 25. Super efficient as a base stealer. Still had a 12%.
Oh no, the light went black. Why'd you do that?
It turned off.
What, you just came and looked and said, I got
time
later.
I got an hour and 24 minutes.
Frustrating.
I'll come back later. I'm going to go eat this sandwich and think about it. Hey, we see you when that light goes green and then it goes off. Like there's always someone in the room watching.
Speaking of sandwiches, I think you got a heart out here.
Yeah, I got to head out. Dog needs to go to the vet. She's fine. It's her annual checkup. So big day for her. She actually likes going to the vet because she gets attention. So she gets attention every other day too, but she gets extra attention.
A little bit less with the baby around, I'm guessing.
A little less on the day-to-day. So she's dealing with it. She's doing great. But as always, we do have a special running. If you're interested in a subscription, theathletic.com/ratesandbarrels, $2 a month for the first year. So be sure to get that discount. If you don't have a subscription already, we get tons of draft season content that we're rolling out.
My Imanaga breakdown and then also my Hall of Fame ballot reveal are up today. If you sign up, you can read both of those.
If I were a gambling man, I would say we're probably going to talk a little bit about the Hall of Fame ballot on the 3-0 show on Thursday. So be sure to check that out over in the Athletic Baseball Show feed. We'll have Katie Wu in for Britt. Britt's on vacation. So we'll have a ton to talk about, including Chaim Bloom joining the Cardinals front office. Pretty nice ad, I think, for St. Louis. So theathletic.com/ratesandbarrels, $2 a month gets you in the door. You can find Eno on Twitter at EnoSaris. You can find me at Derek the Riper. Follow the pod at Rates and Barrels. It's going to do it for this episode of Rates and Barrels. We're back with you on Tuesday.
Thanks for listening.